I gathered what I believed to be evidence of criminal wrongdoing or unwise policies, right? Things that had an impact or implication on rights, as well as documents that I never intended to be published, right? But journalists needed to have access to understand where these programs are effective, where they do need to be protected and perpetuated, and where they're not, and where the government is basically snowing them and saying, oh no, this is fine, we don't do that kind of stuff. Because the government, of course, just basically says, oh no, none of this should ever be published. They had to have the context, right, as well as the smoking gun. So each journalist that received this material from me was required, as a condition of access to the archive, not to publish any story simply because it was interesting, simply because it was newsworthy. They were required to stake an independent editorial judgment that each story was in the public interest to know. This meant that there would actually be some public value rather than simply it's informative, right? It's some secret that people didn't know. In all cases that I'm aware of, this process was followed. Now, do I agree with every publication decision? No, I don't. But this is actually the reason why I made sure that I was not in the process of publication. Because I'm not the president, right? I should not be making decisions, nor do I believe any individual should strictly be making decisions on their own about what should be known, what should not be known. Now, I'm pretty conservative. There are other people who disagree. WikiLeaks, for example, takes a very different position on this. But I went further beyond this. The journalists, before they published any story that they independently said this needs to be known, went to the government in advance of publication. They were required to do this by me, to give the government a chance to argue back exactly this thing. Maybe I didn't understand what the hell I was talking about. Maybe I didn't understand what these documents meant. Maybe I misrepresented them to the journalists, tried to push them in a political direction or something like that. Maybe the journalists couldn't see the big picture, and this would impact lives, right? Somebody would get hurt in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Somebody somewhere would come to harm. Some program would be shut that was necessary, valuable, at saving lives every day. And in all cases, that happened, right? The government didn't have a veto right, but they had a chance to make their case. And there are some cases where they changed stories as a result. I'm not aware that they actually killed a story completely, that they spiked it, but they did change them. Now, the idea here, why I was doing this, was to replicate that same system of checks and balances that's supposed to be functioning amongst the government, the White House administration, the courts, and the legislature. If I went and said, I'm just going to do this my own way, that wouldn't really mesh properly with what the real problem was. Now, did I do it right? Does that mean nobody could be harmed, nobody could be risked, there was no danger at all? It doesn't, right? Things could go wrong. Problems could still happen. But ultimately, we have to argue on the basis of evidence today. In 2013, a lot of people came forward and they said, look, this is dangerous. People are going to have blood on their hands. Any journalist touching these documents, lives are going to be lost. But by 2017, nobody talks like that anymore. There has been no public evidence at all that's been presented by the government that anyone has come to harm as a result of these disclosures. We know for sure no one's died or been harmed. There have been allegations, right, that this has made intelligence collection more difficult here. Maybe somebody's changed their methods of communicating there. It's possible it's true. We can't prove it. We can't disprove it. There have been studies done that have said that's not the case, but we don't really know. But the central question that we need to answer here to resolve this is, if something had to be published because the public could not cast their vote in an informed way, without this information, should it be, even if there's some potential risk involved in that process? This is a hard question, right? And everybody has to come to their own decision. This is why the First Amendment is first. This is why, more than anything else, we protect the freedom of the press in the United States. Because while we see officials talk about allegations of harm, right, talk about potentialities of risks, what they're actually doing is shifting the conversation from the concrete harms of these unlawful programs, of these specific facts and circumstances which we have, which we know, which we can prove, to the theoretical risks of doing journalism. Somebody could get a story wrong and it could have consequences. Ultimately, I will always come down on the side of the press because that is the way our country is designed. I do not intend, and I do not recommend that anybody else should try to place anybody at risk, right? It doesn't matter whether you're a soldier. It doesn't matter whether you're an ordinary person. We should always try to mitigate harms. We should try to mitigate the risks of these conversations. But at the same time, we should make sure that we remember every democracy, modern democracy in the United States, every government, every White House, every president we've had derives their legitimacy from a single point: the consent of the governed. And hopefully anybody who's in college can tell you consent is only meaningful if it's informed. We're never going to have perfect journalism, right? We've got bad reportage that comes out of news media, corporate media, independent media, bloggers. If people are writing stories, some stories are going to be wrong. Do we give up because of that? No. Is there undue influence in the media from powerful institutions? Yes. Anybody, particularly in a minority group, could tell you that, look, if you don't have access to money, to power, to resources, to influence, it's very difficult to be not only heard, but even to be talked about fairly. Because other people are going to be painting your portrait with a brush provided by your enemies. Again, I don't want to speak beyond my expertise here. I don't want to pretend that I have the answers to these. These are classic hard problems in democracy, but I think the answer to this is not that we shut down, that we go, oh, we can't trust the media. It's to learn to think critically. In every case, the answer to bad speech is not censorship, right? The answer to bad speech is more speech, better speech. Ultimately, as long as we remember a single point, which is that which can be asserted without evidence, must be dismissed without evidence, we can have a fact-based conversation that regardless of how people are writing about it, we can arrive at our own decisions in an informed and reasoned way. People put too much sort of mastermind influence in it. They think, you know, myself or the journalists or perhaps us in like conspiracy are sitting around and like, we're moving these chess pieces, deciding when to release this story or whatever. I had no influence on the editorial decision of when particular stories were published, when they ran, because I'm not a journalist, I'm not an editor, right? I'm the source. I simply say this is what's going on, and they decide when and how to run that. Beyond that, you know, there's a question: did it actually strain U.S.-China relations? I don't think that's actually the case. I think more than anything else, the activities of the Chinese government and the United States government are the things that strain relations. And there's a larger idea here, which is when someone reveals a secret, are they the one who caused harm, right, of consequence from things that came out of this? Or the people that did the activity that were being revealed the one who actually caused the harm? Right? U.S. and China relations, even particularly today, do not seem to be defined on the basis of surveillance, or the basis of military force, anything like that, so much as they are on the basis of trade. We're talking about currency manipulation and things like that. That's what gets all the ink nowadays. But were that not the case, right? And we look at cases like the NSA hacking into Chinese hospitals, Chinese universities. The Chinese have done similar things. I'm not aware of the targeting of civilian infrastructure, but that wasn't my specialty. I looked at hacking defense agencies and things like that. Is the revelation of this the actual source of harm? Or is the fact that somebody somewhere made a decision and said, you know what, it is a hospital. If something goes wrong, lives would be lost. But we really want to have control of this point of infrastructure for whatever reason, right? Whether it's a contingency for military, intelligence, or economic conflict, whether it's simple, traditional espionage, the kind that always happens, or other things. It is institutions and organizations that are responsible for their own decisions.